Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out YouTube channel. And in the video today, we've got something very different for you. This is a special bonus episode. If you're watching this right now, that means that we very recently passed the 1 million subscribers mark. And we just wanted to make this video. You'll notice it's incredibly lengthy because we wanted to do something special for the 1 million mark. I've been working on this video for many days. I know David has also been working on it for many days. So we're quite excited to present to you. This is how we make our videos. We've been asked a lot of times how exactly it works behind the scenes. So basically in this video we lay everything out for you. From the first half is David talking about the writing and the research process, and the second half is me talking about the production process. So I really hope you enjoy all of that. Kind of before we get into it, I also wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who has subscribed, whether you subscribed all the way back in the beginning or if you just saw this video and you subscribed right now. Whatever the case, I'd love to thank you. It took us a long time to get here. It may seem like we grew super fast, but it was last November. We'd been doing this for about 18 months. We'd made 500 videos and we had 40,000 subscribers. In the last 8 months, we've basically grown from 40,000 subscribers to 1 million and hopefully beyond. So thank you so much to everyone who has been there. Like I say, whether you subscribed right now or whether you subscribed 2 years ago, we really appreciate you being here, and we really hope that the future is bright for this channel, and whatever the next milestone is, I'll look forward to doing another video, maybe like this, maybe on a different topic then. Anyway, let's roll right into it, and I'll hand things over to David to kick us off. Thanks.
So the first thing here in the creation process is the initial topic idea. Given how much content we churn out, a lot of people seem to assume this is one of the hard parts, but it's actually one of the easiest as the process is more than self-sustaining. So for example, when researching a given topic, we'll usually come across other interesting topics, or in reading something, it'll cause us to wonder about something else, not really relevant to what we're writing about at the time, but that would be a good topic in and of itself. Beyond that, given this is what we do for a living, even when not working, ideas for potential interesting topics pop into our heads all the time, where we'll wonder about something, and then for instance, I'll just send myself a quick email when I think of something I think might be interesting. And as for Today I Found Out authors, they can either email me when they have ideas or come across something, or they can also put them in a shared potential topic spreadsheet for me to review. Carl Smallwood particularly submits a ton of great topic ideas all the time, particularly good at coming up with some of the more zany ones you'll see on the channel and website. Beyond that, Today I Found Out fans send us potential topic ideas from things they'll come across or something they're wondering about all the time. This happens in website, YouTube, and social media comments, as well as in direct emails or in replies to our email newsletter. These are all collected and put into a spreadsheet for me to review for approval or not. So once a topic gets approved by me, it then ends up in this spreadsheet with me writing a very brief description on what the focus should be. All regular Today I Found Out authors have access to this and can pick and choose what topics they want simply by putting their name next to it, though I do request they only select a few at a time. Regular authors are free to pivot a little here and focusing on a different aspect of the thing if they discover something more interesting when researching, but this at least gives them a general outline to start with. The main point of this is to remove as much administrative overhead as possible and allow the authors to pick topics they're interested in covering. Assigning a topic a given author isn't interested in is a great way to get a subpar final product in my experience. That's not to say I never assign topics. Like if someone has a particular expertise, like Melissa is a lawyer and Scott's a medical expert, so if a topic in one of those categories I think might be a particularly difficult one to cover, I might send it directly to them instead of adding it to the general list. But even then, they're always free to reject working on a topic if they just aren't interested in it. Again, I think it's really key that the person working on a topic needs to be very interested in it in order for the final product to end up being good. As for the Do Trees Poop topic you'll be watching us create today, this was originally a fan question and is actually one of the rare assigned ones, as a topic like covering tree poop is right up Carl's alley, and I particularly wanted to pick the topic for the behind the scenes video today, as I wanted to try to find something that would have a high probability of more or less being a typical Today I Found Out article, to try to give a good representation of what the normal process is for us. Obviously, given the topics vary wildly, the work that goes into them can likewise vary considerably, both in time and what needs done to do it. But I figured this one seemed like it was a good fit to be more typical, which indeed mostly turned out to be correct, other than the fact that it was assigned and not selected out by Carl, and there was a couple more hours than normal thrown in there due to a certain amount of uncertainty on aspects of the topic among experts in the field, which required a little extra digging to sort out. So as for what each author does once they select an article, this actually varies a bit from topic to topic and author to author. For this topic, Carl notes he started by referencing a number of textbooks on the basic biology of plants so I could confidently write about the processes involved and get a feel for the language used when addressing a person maybe unfamiliar with the topic. Then he notes, once I feel comfortable I have a basic understanding of the concept, I will then delve into more dense literature, usually consulting Google Books and Scholar to gain a deeper understanding of what exactly is going on, and then do more general searches to follow up on stuff I've learned and to clarify different things. Once I have all the research in place, I will then write the article in my head. Usually I'll take a brief break and do something mundane like go for a jog, make a cup of tea, or simply listen to some music. This usually takes about 30 minutes, and in that time I formulate the basic structure of the article, how it will flow, and the main talking points. I'll then write the introduction, which is one of the most time-intensive parts of the entire process. The introduction will go through anywhere upwards of a dozen drafts as I try to find the right voice for the article. I try to make sure every introduction introduces the topic at hand, asks a question the reader will want to know the answer to provide an incentive to keep reading, and usually contain a joke. The actual writing of the article itself takes a couple hours. The first draft takes about an hour. I then read through the entire thing out loud to look for awkward wordings or sentences. I then change the font size and put the whole thing in bold, a technique I read about that helps with proofreading to look for mistakes. I'll then go through the whole article again to see if there are any dull paragraphs, basically any paragraph that doesn't contain at least a few new pieces of information for a reader, and correct that by further researching the topic being discussed within it to see if there are any more things I can mention that are interesting. I then submit the whole thing to the site's WordPress, I write everything in Google Docs, and give it one last look over for mistakes. As Carl notes there, once an author is done with a piece, it ends up on the site marked as pending, with currently there being over 670 pending articles waiting for me to do my part on. Mainly because since bringing others on board about 4 or 5 years ago, everything has very much been a collaborative effort, which I found is the best way to produce the best content, but doesn't exactly scale well with only one editor. But bottom line, when I write the pieces myself completely, or one of Today I Found Out's authors do, it rarely turns out as good as if multiple minds were leveled on the subject. So once something goes up as pending, I then at some point will review it, occasionally even years later, though usually much more promptly, particularly tending to be biased towards recently submitted things, just from regularly checking what's coming in. As the topic of why trees poop was assigned for this very video, I reviewed it immediately and recorded my process for your viewing pleasure. So my first step here is to simply read the article to see what, in this case, Carl dug up, and the narrative he took and all that kind of thing. This also functions to familiarize myself very well with the given topic, as regular Today I Found Out authors like Carl tend to do a really good job at explaining things. Once I've done that, and usually then have a really good sense of the subject, I'll completely re-research the thing. First using the listed sources and then expanding beyond that just to make sure, as of course the listed sources are going to reflect what the author wrote as far as the facts and details and all that. So it's probably important to note here that the listed sources are not actually the complete list of sources. We typically omit redundant sources that we use for verification purposes. The reasons for this are twofold. First, from a strictly practical standpoint, the Google gods require regular sacrifices upon their altar, one of which being it wouldn't be a good idea to put many dozens of links to random sites on every page on Today I Found Out. And even in YouTube, where we don't care so much about that, we occasionally have run into the issue of having too many sources, even with the way we do it. So the description ends up being too long and YouTube complains at us about it, and we have to trim things down. The second reason is just that the sources are not just meant to give credit where credit is due, but also to give readers and viewers a way to read more on a given topic if they so choose. Having dozens of redundant sources ends up not being as good as simply picking the best source for a given piece of information that also hopefully expands on stuff we don't cover related to the topic. Of course, sometimes a given source might just talk about some snippet of information we include in the article, but they're the best one who mentions that snippet, so even though that one doesn't include extra information, it will get included. But when looking at many sources saying the same thing, we'll usually try to pick the one that also says other interesting stuff we don't mention to sort of attempt to make the reference section somewhat useful to people. In any event, while re-researching the topic, if I come across any other potential interesting topics that would make for a good full article, I'll note those, usually just in Notepad at first and later processing them for the main topics file later. Or if the thing is just an interesting snippet that may fit in the article and hasn't already been included by the author, I'll note it to see if it can be worked in naturally, or if not, use it as a bonus fact. My main strategy, however, is not just to try to find stuff a given author might have missed or just decided not to include. Usually today I found out authors are really good at picking out interesting tidbits. What I'm really looking to do here is to attempt to ensure extreme accuracy, which is harder than a lot of people seem to think. No matter how good one is at researching, separating fact from fiction, and spotting inconsistencies from otherwise reputable sources, everyone is going to get stuff wrong sometimes. So it's not just looking up something in the Oxford English Dictionary or Encyclopedia Britannica, or reading something some expert in the field is saying and then parroting that. Again, everyone gets details wrong quite often, even the most accurate of sources. For instance, a study published in Nature in 2005 demonstrated Britannica had 2.92 errors per science article at that point. Most of these were minor, but mistakes nonetheless. And for reference, they found Wikipedia at that time almost matched that at 3.86 errors per science article. This provides the dual lesson of never trusting any single source, no matter how prestigious, and not committing the popular mistake of thinking Wikipedia is not at least a reasonably good source, though again, double-checking always needs done. In any event, I've personally found many errors in the Oxford English Dictionary over the last near decade I've been doing this, arguably one of the most accurate etymological sources in the history of humanity. Again, nobody bats 1,000. It's simply impossible to be perfectly accurate in every little detail no matter how hard you try. But by completely re-researching the topics, I can at least up the accuracy a little beyond what the already very accurate Today I Found Out authors have done. And as for my strategy of ensuring what I'm coming up with is accurate, similar to what the authors do beyond a healthy level of skepticism in everything we read, I'm mainly looking to consult a ton of good sources on a subject, noting discrepancies between them and potentially any discrepancy with what a given source is saying versus what the Today I Found Out author wrote. And of course looking at where they all agree, then trying to track down the truth between the discrepancies if possible, or if not, probably then mentioning the conflict explicitly in the article. On that, I might emphasize one idea that seems the most plausible given all the data at hand and only briefly mention the alternates, or if it's not clear at all which is right, give them equal coverage. Or if one is very clearly correct, but nonetheless something else is often touted as correct by otherwise reputable sources, we want to be sure and debunk that and thoroughly explain why this other thing is actually correct, and not something else you might have otherwise heard. Occasionally we'll also come across something where everybody is saying the same thing, but it just doesn't seem right, which is where the skepticism element comes into play as a useful tool in one's accuracy toolbox. For example, a few months back we did an article on Pelorus Jack, the dolphin who supposedly used to guide ships through parts of the sometimes dangerous Cook Strait in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Every single modern source we could find discussing the dolphin stated this, even occasionally citing early 20th century news stories stating that the dolphin did this. It all seemed very credible given the sources, but it had all the earmarks of something that's been exaggerated over time. I was particularly thinking, what ship captain is actually going to trust that some random dolphin understands his ship's capabilities and going to trust it to guide said ship through dangerous seas? On top of that, this was at the time supposedly a highly trafficked area. With just one dolphin to guide ships, that's going to result in quite the traffic jam. And dolphins love to play in the wake of boats and ships. So might that just have been what was happening, and it's just been exaggerated in the century since, and originally by news reports, which have been prone to sensationalize things pretty much as long as there have been news reports. I mean, there must have been some reason this dolphin was once so newsworthy, but the whole thing just seemed fishy. So despite the many reputable sources saying this, I didn't really feel comfortable publishing it without a first-hand account of a ship captain or a sailor or the like who'd actually seen the dolphin in action and corroborated the story. Many hours of trolling through old newspaper archives from the region and time period in question, and I finally came across some first-hand accounts of the dolphin in action. And indeed, given these accounts, this was just a dolphin that liked to play in the ship's wakes in the area. As to why he was so newsworthy at the time, this was to do with his consistency in appearing, usually briefly, in the wake of most ships traveling through a section of the strait, before switching to a different ship day or night. He achieved this as while dolphins do need approximately 8 hours of sleep per 24-hour cycle, dolphins don't actually ever go into a full sleep state, in terms of becoming completely unconscious like humans. They can't do this, in fact, because they don't breathe automatically, meaning to become fully unconscious underwater would mean their death. How dolphins handle this is to essentially put one hemisphere of their brain to sleep at a time while the other still functions as it would when conscious. They then alternate which side of their brain is sleeping periodically. Doing this for about 8 hours per day, usually sporadically rather than 8 straight hours like a human, allows them to be conscious enough to remain aware of their environment and periodically swim to the surface for air while still getting sleep. Thus, Jack's widely reported consistency in making an appearance alongside just about every ship that passed through the section of the strait he called home, at least for a few minutes at a time, may well have been helped by the fact that he was always aware when ships were around, and could wake up and go hop around in their bow waves for a bit if he chose. And if you're now curious for why he did it, it's thought he was the only Riso dolphin in the region for the 2 or 3 decades he swam the strait. So it was probably just lonely and bored, Riso dolphins normally being very social animals traveling in large groups. He became something of a tourist attraction, with even the likes of Mark Twain traveling to see him firsthand. As far as I could find, the idea of him not just appearing in the wakes of ships, but guiding them, goes all the way back to 1917, only a few years after the dolphin disappeared, in a report in the Mid-Pacific magazine, so perhaps why so many otherwise reputable sources today say that Pelorus Jack used to guide ships, even though this is unequivocally false. Despite at this point having spent a few days on this topic, normally I'd not publish it at all, as topics like, did the dolphin really guide all ships through Cook Strait in the early 20th century? And the answer ending up being 3,412 words that essentially just sum up to no, isn't on the surface terribly interesting. Although I actually think that one ended up being moderately interesting even so, peppered with some good dolphin facts and an interesting section on one of the deadliest maritime disasters in New Zealand history, the demise of the SS Penguin, a ship Pelorus Jack purportedly avoided after an incident in 1904, giving rise to the legend that it only sunk because Pelorus Jack wouldn't guide it through the strait as he did other ships. But overall, the piece was not really up to par with our normal work on the interesting front. I only ended up publishing it all because everyone else was saying one thing, and we, at least at that point, were the only modern source that had the real full story. So not so much publishing for the general fan of the site or YouTube channel, but more just to put it out there as a reference for others covering the dolphin. So you see, the point is in all of this that it's not just ridiculously hard to be perfectly accurate given the current state of human knowledge on a subject, but very much impossible no matter how hard one tries. That's not to mention that the current state of human knowledge on a subject can sometimes change over time, further throwing a wrench in things. So bottom line again, everybody gets stuff wrong sometimes. There are no exceptions to this. My job in all of this is to give my best college try to ensure none of Today I Found Out's authors, who are an extremely skilled bunch, get something wrong. This sort of collaborative researching and writing helps facilitate this better than if, say, I just continued to write and research things myself as I used to do with nobody double-checking me, or just published what my authors come up with without doing my part as well. Even then, it's still impossible to catch everything, of course, but at least the effort's there. Beyond slightly better accuracy, one major bonus in at least making the attempt to be perfectly accurate is that both the original author and myself, in doing a deeper dive than most, not once but twice, will inevitably find interesting details and tidbits others covering the same topic probably didn't find. So back to the article creation. After I take notes, which I always place in Notepad on my right screen, I read through the article again and begin to add any additional tidbits I think should be included from memory, putting XYZ where I can't remember the specific details or the like as sort of a placeholder. If rearranging stuff or removing something the original author wrote for some reason, I'll copy that to a Notepad file on the left screen. This keeps it as something I can refer back to if the reason I removed it is I want to do a wholesale rewording of that section to perhaps integrate some other related interesting bit of information. I may also later simply copy it back into the main article somewhere else. By always keeping it on the left screen and the notes always on the right screen, it ensures I don't mix that text up with the notes file contents, as obviously that would be amazingly bad if I accidentally copied and pasted something a non-Today I Found Out author wrote into an article. After I've done all that, I start to process the notes file, reading over every note taken and filling out the details in the article from them, or just deleting them if the note was just for verification purposes or not something I ended up wanting to include, as it's not interesting or too much of a tangent or whatever upon further review. Although, as previously mentioned, if the tangent is super interesting and I can't work it into the main article in a natural way, I'll put it in the bonus facts, or even potentially make it into an article of its own if it's sufficiently worthy of such. During this whole process, I'm looking to craft the final narrative or flow of the article, which is usually roughly what the original author came up with, if not exactly what they came up with, if they've been writing for Today I Found Out for long enough and get the style I'm wanting here. Like someone like Carl, who's been writing for Today I Found Out for about 4 years now, I think. But mainly here, I'm looking to ensure the final product is fairly consistent with Today I Found Out's normal voice and style, including being very densely information-packed, giving you more than you expected just from the title. Like in an article about the origin of the expression piss like a racehorse, you're not just going to learn the origin of the expression, you're going to learn some interesting things about horse racing. Or in one about why Yankee Doodle called the feather in his hat macaroni, you're going to learn about some interesting related stuff, like the interesting origin of the expression dude. On that note, I'm also looking to weed out uninteresting bits, which is quite subjective on the latter, but as I'm the creator of the site and a big fan of this type of content, I just kind of go with what I think is interesting, which as I've learned over the years is a great way to ensure a steady stream of complaint emails about how boring Today I Found Out's content is. On that note, in all topics, we're trying to balance entertaining you while simultaneously teaching you or broadening your knowledge on something. To really hit that edutainment mark well, though generally trying to err slightly more on the side of educating than many in the genre do. It's a very fine line between something being entertaining versus seeming like being in school. And I will never claim that we managed to hit that mark perfectly on every piece created. But again, at least the effort's there. The main point of all this is to really try to make a given topic our own, so to speak. Everything has been covered by somebody somewhere, so what we're really trying to do here is make sure Today I Found Out's version is unique in some way. To accomplish this, as previously alluded to, we're first looking to make it ultra accurate down to the tiniest details, which right there separates it from many in the genre. This is super important, not just because it figuratively kills me every single time we get some tidbit wrong, but because that is a huge part of why Today I Found Out was created in the first place, along with being a byproduct of my productive procrastination philosophy, which in a nutshell is the idea that if you find yourself procrastinating a lot doing something, try to make that something productive in some way. In this case, it's productive both in learning new things, which is always good, as well as attempting to make a living out of doing just that. In any event, at the time in 2009 when I created this site, there really weren't a lot of good, interesting fact sites or channels out there. Now this was before CGP Grey, Vsauce, Minute Physics, SciShow, Numberphile, Crash Course, etc. Technically Destin of Smarter Every Day had started posting occasional awesome educational videos going all the way back to 2008, but it didn't become the focus of his channel until 2011. Reddit's Today I Learned, which of course is more of an aggregate of other people's work rather than creating something somewhat unique as these other people do, tended to be sensationalized for effect with a lot of subtle inaccuracies or outright incorrect stuff as a result. That's not to say there weren't a few good ones out there like Mental Floss, Snopes, Worldwise Words, or sort of the Godfather, the mysterious individual or individuals known only as Cecil Adams of the Straight Dope, which was being published all the way back in 1973, just it was rare. So what I was really looking to do was create an ultra-accurate source of interesting facts. And I thought that as an okay writer fresh out of a master's level course on how to properly research stuff, combined with my inherent nature of just naturally being super anal about being accurate on things, this was something I could do. Of course, in reality, looking back, I wasn't actually good at this sort of research, was an absolute horrible interesting fact article writer in so many ways, and just generally sucked at this whole thing for quite some time. But with many thousands of hours of practice, one improves a little, and that process continues many years later. Beyond improving my own work over time, when I was able to start bringing other team members on board after a few years, things improved dramatically on all fronts thanks to the sort of collaborative research and writing process that has been honed ever since. But in any event, the main point here is that while it's still impossible to be perfectly accurate all the time, in at least making the attempt in both deep and broad research, we simultaneously separate our content somewhat from certain others in the genre, while also finding bits of information others aren't including in their coverage of a topic. More or less putting our own stamp on the thing. Alright, so back to editing. As I'm going through the notes and polishing up the article, I sometimes wonder about something or am unsure about some little tidbit, and so we'll usually still have a little bit of research to do, similar to what Carl was mentioning. Essentially, I'm looking to make sure that I understand fully everything being said and every word being used, which is another key part in ensuring accuracy and catching little mistakes from otherwise reputable sources. After rinsing and repeating on all this, I'll ultimately get through all the notes, and at this point the article is mostly done. From here I'll just read through it over and over and over again, polishing up the writing given any changes I've made to the original piece, particularly making sure anything I've added hasn't screwed with the original text from the author. This is also the final check in removing parts I think that aren't interesting enough, or move them to bonus facts if they are interesting but don't quite fit. Or do some final rearranging or the like, similar to what's been going on this whole time. At this stage, it's all about strictly editing and not adding anything new. As I progressively get closer to the end, I also start trying to focus more and more on trying to see the thing from the end consumer's perspective, who's just coming across the topic for the first time, trying to make sure everything is crystal clear, which is actually a surprisingly hard part of all this, just owing to how much outside information on the topic we've read and how many times we've read through the article itself. This is one of the reasons it's important on the final read-through not to make much in the way of any change, as once one starts getting sidetracked on modifying some bit too heavily, the rest of the article and narrative to a certain extent kind of go out of your head a bit, and you really need to start over from the beginning to again try to see the whole thing from the perspective of someone who knows nothing about the topic, and make sure everything relevant is included to make things clear. Once I do get through the whole thing with only making minimal modifications, maybe tweaking a bit of grammar here or there, or changing the wording of something very slightly, I'll give it one last read through and then it's finally done. As for how many full read-throughs it takes to achieve all this varies considerably from topic to topic, and I've never really bothered to keep track of this to really know a definitive average. Though I'd imagine it probably ranges from about a minimum of maybe 5 times to the article and a maximum of maybe a couple dozen times or so for me, and then however many times the original author goes through it before I even see it. That's not to mention the many times an individual section of the whole must be read through in the process of all of that. For reference on this tree poop article, I counted 10 times for myself reading through the article from start to finish, with many more times read through on the individual paragraphs and sections. Alright, so now the article's done and we now definitively know the answer to the question of whether trees pee and poop. What happens from here? This depends. Usually, but not always, it will get published on the website first, and if it's particularly good, sent out on Today I Found Out's email newsletter. This is another key way to ensure accuracy before something gets to YouTube outside of all the other efforts. As Cunningham's Law notes, the best way to get the right answer on the internet is not to ask a question, but to post the wrong answer. Between the website and the newsletter, on average, maybe about 20 or 30,000 people will have read the thing within the first week. Helpfully, at least according to the various analytics I have available, Today I Found Out's core crowd tends to be a pretty highly educated bunch. That's not to mention potentially hundreds of thousands of people read a given article over the coming years. At present, there are about 2,700 full articles on Today I Found Out, and said content has been read about 200 million times, so an average of 74,000 times per article, though of course there are outliers on each side of that. So if we get some detail wrong, we'll probably hear about it. This doesn't happen very often, usually just things like maybe we typoed a date, like writing 1982 when we meant 1882 or something like that. Which, as an aside, that particular swapping of the 19th century for the 20th and writing a year is something every single author, including myself, that writes for Today I Found Out does occasionally. And as I'm no exception to this rule, even in editing things, I don't always catch it. Funny enough, even Simon does this every now and then when reading a script, so not just a problem in writing and editing. Kind of an interesting phenomenon that doesn't occur when, say, writing something like 1682. Something about the muscle memory of writing 19xy seems to kick in when attempting to reach for that 8 on the keyboard. It'll be interesting to see if that phenomenon disappears once Today I Found Out authors start to be born in the 21st century, or at least late 20th century, and thus having never probably developed the muscle memory of writing 19xy all the time. In any event, even though these sorts of mistakes are quite rare, and even then, typically just something little like that, I don't think we've ever gotten a main point wrong given the current state of human knowledge at the time of the writing. Though we have had a handful of times had to modify something when the current state of human knowledge changed in the interim from the writing to the present, I still prefer to publish things in this order very much because once something goes up on YouTube, any mistakes can't really be edited, unlike on the website. And beyond potential mistakes, another advantage is that readers give feedback on some part of the article that maybe wasn't really clear. Like they might comment that they're confused about XYZ, which again allows me to fix it before it gets published in a somewhat permanent form on an expensive to produce video. This sort of thing used to happen more in the early days of Today I Found Out, but still every now and then occurs. But even if rare, it's a nice little way to help improve the content that little bit more when needed. This is also a method that's not available to a lot of creators on YouTube, giving us a tiny advantage there. Alright, so now the article's potentially published to a decent sized audience for at least a short time, if not occasionally years. So how does it end up on YouTube, and how do we decide what goes there? To begin with, it's got to be super interesting, at least in Simon and my opinion. Obviously not everybody's going to be interested in everything we put up, given the extremely diverse topics we cover. But even with that caveat, not all Today I Found Out content is worthy of spending the time and money to put it in video form. And we're very cognizant of the fact that subscribers don't stay such if not given a steady stream of great content. And as subscribers of the lifeblood of the channel, in this case we do definitely go outside of my normal, well, I find it interesting, so other people like me probably will too, strategy on the website, and try to use metrics of what sort of things end up being liked the most by our subscribers and that sort of thing, to ensure we're delivering what people want and not just what I think is interesting. So once a piece of content's been identified, whether by Simon trolling through the archives, perhaps looking for something relevant to something coming up, or to find something that's similar to other stuff you guys all seem to really like based on our various metrics, or me just coming across something in the archives over the course of my normal duties, or publishing something I think is particularly good so want to get it up on YouTube quickly, I'll take a look over the article yet again to process for YouTube form. In the case of a piece of content that's quite old, this might mean re-editing it and even sometimes re-researching it to get it up to the present quality of content on Today I Found Out, or make sure everything's still true given the current state of human knowledge. And in any case, at the least, making sure everything in what becomes a script is relevant to YouTube. Like changing words like reader to viewer, or if some author wrote as noted above, changing it to as noted previously, or maybe if the article said something like Vice President of Research XYZ, perhaps needing to change that to former Vice President of Research XYZ if the person is no longer in that position, or a bunch of little things like that. I'll also sometimes trim out bits that I think, while interesting in text, might drag down a video a bit or be too much of a tangent or whatever. Again, being cognizant of the fact that YouTube subscribers very definitely have slightly different tastes than Today I Found Out website and newsletter subscribers. In the end, every minute of video production costs that much more, and subscribers getting bored means subscribers who cease to be so and don't watch the videos all the way through. So I'm really trying to tighten up the content a titch where I think needed for video form. Once I've done that, I'll then place it in a shared scripts folder Simon and I use. In order to make sure we don't slip up and cover the same thing, once we're going to cover something, we take it out of the general folder and place it into the Simon or Davin folders. As I'm putting the scripts in the general folder in the first place, I'll usually just take the ones I want right then, which is a perk of my half of running this channel. However, as Simon's the much stronger presenter, I try to only take the ones I think are simultaneously most interesting, but that have little chance of being popular on YouTube outside of our own subscribers. Once the script's in the shared folder, the video production side is Simon's domain, along with running a lot of the administrative side of things for the channel, which in and of itself is shockingly time-consuming, filled with tedious, mostly thankless work. So that's more or less where my work on the videos ends in most cases. For the rest, here's Simon.
All right, thanks to David for doing the first part of that video talking about the script production process. I hope this transition wasn't too abrupt. David and I have been making these videos. He's been doing his part and I've been doing my part at the same time, so we don't exactly know how each other's looks. I hope it looks okay. I hope that wasn't too abrupt. Now I'm going to talk all about the YouTube side of things, taking that script, that article that David and Carl have made, Why Trees Poop, I think it is. I'm about to get all into it, and turning that into something that we can put on YouTube. So I'm going to be taking you through the whole production process. I hope that this is interesting. I'll try and make it as entertaining as possible. I know it's quite a long process. Also, as we go through this, I am going to be making a rough estimation, like David did, of how long each section takes. As we go through it, I'll kind of be thinking about it and kind of also based on my previous experience. And at the end, I'll kind of put up a thing saying this takes approximately X number of hours, and then at the end of the whole video, I'll take my time and kind of sum it up. And if David's done his already, I'll also sum up for everyone, and you'll get an idea of how long basically taking an idea or ideation to final video, how long that all takes. Now, I was kind of hoping to do this in a mostly linear fashion, going through everything one step at a time, but I realized there's kind of one element of this that it's really hard to define, it's really hard to kind of specifically, it's kind of jumping in for 30 seconds here, jumping in for 30 seconds there, and that's kind of the management of everything, and that's done in what I call the TIFO, which stands for Today I Found Out, production sheet. So let's dive into that. My computer is over there. I'm going to do a bit of Camtasia screencasting. So you can see it has title up here, author, background color. You'll notice that we rotate the background color on the video. So I assign here for our video producer. The whole video production I'll get to in a few moments. and I'll assign it based on the topic. So blue is for science, red is for history, again science, again history. Cyan, I think is, what is cyan? I don't even remember. I think cyan's maybe miscellaneous. Yeah, renting pandas, that seems pretty miscellaneous, so I'm gonna go ahead and assume that. Okay, so then when a new video comes in, you can also see we organize collaborations in here. So you can see this and this. We've got a collaboration with List25 coming up, and we just did one with All-Time Conspiracies. And all along here, you can see just how it works. So basically, when a new script comes my way, here's the production sheet for July. I put this in. So I put in do trees poop, and I put in the author, Carl Smallwood. And then I actually assign a background color later in the process, but let's assign that now, and we'll put this under science. Ready for recording. So I've got the script, it's ready to go. So the time spent on this side of the production process, kind of the management of everything, is actually really hard to define. I didn't actually come up with a figure per video because, you know, I'm often managing a lot of videos at once. It's about managing a schedule, you know, making sure there are videos ready to go out when I'm on holiday and all of this sort of thing. And also managing, you know, sponsorships, ad reads, these sort of stuff that needs to go into the videos, which ones, you know, they need to go into. You probably saw on the production sheet, like in the notes thing, it'll say, you know, Skillshare or the Great Courses Plus or Blue Apron or whoever has an ad spot with that video, and kind of just keeping that all managed. I would estimate for a very simple video, the overall management time, this is a really hard figure to nail down, but I would say 20 to 40 minutes per video, I guess, on average. Alright, so now we come to the part of the video which is the proofing process. As you just saw, by the time this article/script comes to me, Carl and David have gone over this thoroughly. So at this point, I'm not doing any fact checking, I'm not diving into any of the research. That isn't what I do, that's already been masterfully done by the other guys. When it comes to me, I'm just looking for things that I'm going to kind of slip over, little, you know, sentences that might not read perfectly in my voice, making a few tweaks and corrections just so that rather than being a pure article, it's more of a script. It flows out of my mouth a little bit easier, so it's not just like purely reading someone else's words. It's just adding little tweaks and bits that make it easier for me to say, basically. And also, when I am proofing it, which we'll go over and look at in the computer in a moment, also I will often read this aloud so that it gives me like a dry run, a practice run, so that when I do it live, when I do it in front of the camera, I've had a round of practice. I've had a go at it already to make it work. So let's go over to the computer and I'll show you how it's done. Oh, another thing I do want to mention before we really get more into this is that coffee, really important part of this production process. I'm going to brew myself a cup. Hot but good. Well, you know, reasonable. It is instant coffee, but it's not bad. I like about instant coffee is you can add as many spoons as you want, so you can make it as strong as you want. I like it strong, 2.5 big spoons, but that is a big cup, though I'd rather real coffee. You know, Nespresso, if you ever get tired of having George Clooney as the front man, and you want like a YouTuber to be the new George of Nespresso, give me a call, leave a comment, fuel the future of this channel. So when I've got a script, it will be uploaded to our shared Dropbox folder. I go in there and I can see it here, do trees poop and pee. Do trees poop and pee. I'll just quickly adjust the title here. It's all these little tweaks, you know, there's always little tweaks to do. Okay, so I have this in my Dropbox here. Looks to be a reasonable length, not an epic video. I think we've done some that are 45 minutes. Obviously those take way, way longer. This one is... it's not so long, 2,000 words, so maybe a 10-minute video. So, as much as I like Word Online and Dropbox, I don't like it that much. I typically copy everything into a Google Drive document just because I like it more. I'm used to editing in here. Okay, and now basically what I do is I just whip through this. I'm going to start a little timer so I can actually accurately measure how long this process actually takes. So I downloaded a free timer app, but it seems to kind of suck. Okay, so I'm just going to go through this. The timer will run. We'll put that there. The video will speed up now, and I'll be back. Okay, this timer sucks. I've got to upgrade in order to make it smaller because I don't want to pay for the timer that I'm going to use once. So I'm just going to leave this to run, and I'll show it at the end. Okay, so as you can see, that took about 25 minutes, a little longer than average, but not massively. So things I basically noted and changed in this one. Big one I often hear, I'm kind of reminded, I've never really thought too much in depth about it, but long sentences are a big one. I will usually break those up. I'll add some commas, which I'm sure are not grammatically correct, but they act as kind of places for me to take a breath. There are just some words I prefer to use, like I'll remove a yes and replace it with a yep, like for this example. To begin with, all living things excrete things that they no longer need, or which otherwise might be harmful to them if allowed to build up in said being system. Yes, everything from the lowliest single cell. I just prefer it when it says, yep, everything from the lowliest single-celled organisms to blue whales do that. It just sounds kind of more casual, more video rather than, and less article. It's just one of those things I like to change. I sometimes note words that need emphasis and put them in speech marks, like here, over what might be considered tree poop. And that wasn't actually what I did, but there's other ones I changed just to mark as these should be emphasized in the video. There's another thing that is quite painful to read, which works quite well in text, which are double asides. So you can have, an aside, so often something in brackets. So I could say, there is a bit of semantic argument to be had over what might be considered tree poop, and there is a sentence I never thought I'd say. To begin with, so that's an aside, and you can also have asides within asides, which are unusual, but they do happen. There was one in here. I'm not going to dig it up now. There are also some sentences which, they can read fine when you're doing it in your head, but when you read them out loud, they just sound super awkward. If they're not important, I'll sometimes just simply cut them out or maybe do a bit of rewording. There was maybe 10 words I cut out of the script that I just couldn't wrap my mouth around or brain around. And that's pretty much it. That's what the script looks like at this point. Then basically, in preparation to load this up onto the teleprompter, I need to make it plain text. So then I copy all of this, I dump it into just text edit or whatever it's called, and then I save this to my Dropbox. Then, well, you'll see what happens. You'll see what happens in the next section. And that is the end of the proofing section. I estimate, what did we have, like 25 minutes for the proofing? Then I'd add like another 10 minutes on either side for kind of prepping and doing all the bits and pieces and other stuff. So maybe like 30 to 40 minutes total time spent in the proofing. Now let's move on to the next section. Alright, so with the video proofed, we move on to the recording side of things. This is essentially where I stand in front of the camera and Can you hear that? That is the traffic going by outside. This often is a reason I have to stop recording midway because there's an ambulance or a motorcyclist with an obnoxiously loud engine going past. Yeah, these things, kind of a pain in the... Anyway, so now we move on to the recording bit. I first select a shirt, usually what I'm wearing that day. This is the pink shirt. You probably often see it in some of the videos. It's getting a little bit worn. I should probably replace it. I should probably have a wider selection of shirts. Little secret I thought it'd be interesting to talk about. Not sure if I'm feel so comfortable sharing this, but this is actually really useful. I stole this off my girlfriend. It's like a cover-up cream, so often if I nick myself shaving or I get a spot or something, especially if I'm making a video where I have to fix something and then suddenly like cut or spot appears, this is very useful because you just dab a little bit on and it makes it all go away. It's wonderful. If there was ever a Q&A about do I wear makeup in making the videos, sometimes a little bit of cover up. All right, so let's actually move away from this camera now and I'll take you around the studio as we get set up for the actual recording of the video itself. All right, so the first thing that has to be set up, the first thing doesn't have to be, I tend to do, is turn on the lights. This one goes to, I gotta plug it in. So lights go on, this one to half power, this one up here to full power. I also have these overhead lights. These sound panels basically mean there's not a huge amount of echo going on in here. Then I do backlight. This one here, this I made it myself. This is just a couple of LED strip bulbs on top of a wooden structure that I made. That illuminates the green screen so that when I'm standing here, there's no shadow cast onto the green screen, which would screw it up. After we've got the lights on, turn the camera on. This is a Panasonic GH4. This comes on here. This never leaves this. I turn that on. It complains to me it doesn't have a memory card. That's true. What I do is I just go into the menu. I go to Wi-Fi, setup. You have to do this every time. It's kind of painful. Then you connect it, and that connects to this tablet, which I have over here. And then basically, I'm standing here on this line right here. I'll tell you about this pedal in a second. This is what I see. Teleprompter, lights. In the meantime, grab an SD card, pop that in there, remote operation, and then you see this panel, this lets me know that I'm live. This is super Inception level going on right now. This over there lets me know that I'm in focus when I look at this thing. Standing in the center, and then I just press record. But first, I gotta get the script loaded up into here. And this is the process that I have to go through every time that I want to record something. It used to be a lot more painful because this is my office, which I recently rented maybe 2 months ago. Before I was doing this all in my living room, and I had to set up these lights, put this camera on its tripod, set up this, set up that every single time. And I didn't have this lighting behind me, so this used to look really janky. Remember when my beard used to disappear a lot? Let's load up the script and let's get recording. Then I grab the script from Dropbox, copy all of that. Then I use an application called Parrot Teleprompter. Paste all of that in there, save it, so that's ready to go. Now, I got to connect to my Bluetooth pedal. So this thing, that's a connection. So let me show you what happens. See here? See here? See this? When I press, boom, it starts scrolling. Press again, it stops. So this allows me to read it at a good pace. I can control it myself without having to have the little thing, the clicker thing in my hand, which I used to have. Previous to that clicker thing, I used to use voice recognition, which sucked so bad, I was very glad to be rid of it. Now, the final thing is connecting the lav mic to the camera. I have this very long cable. This plugs into the lav mic, but I have one, and right now it's being used for this video, so I gotta unplug it, plug it into the main camera, and record this video. I think as I'm recording the video, I'll just show that and then speed it up really fast. So let's roll into that. Okay, and that's how the recording process worked. That one took about half an hour. So a little bit longer, I think, than typically. I think there was, whenever you see me on my phone in that video, like, that's me looking up pronunciations. I'll talk about those in a second. Right now, what I do is I grab the memory card from here. I pop that into the computer, and then I transfer all of the files across. So what I do is I grab the files, which are in here. I always have to break these up into parts because I've got a European camera, and I think there's some, like sales tax or whatever reason, they can only record them up to 21 minutes. So that's great. And then I put it in here and I make a little folder and I call it today's date, which is the 18th. And I put that in here. All of this, I have backups of all of this stuff, of course. These go here and then to Dropbox. And also everything is taken to Backblaze, which is a great backup service. So all of this stuff just uploads to the cloud. Fortunately, I'm on a very fast fiber connection, so all of that's made rather easy. So I just wait for these to transfer across. All right, when that's done, that takes a couple of minutes. Do trees poop or pee? I grab the title, and then what I do is I just label this up as part 1 and as part 2. Okay, now the next step for those things is for them to be edited, which is going to be the next step. I did just want to say quickly before we get into the editing process about pronunciations, you probably saw in that video how I would grab my phone and be like, the very quick 12 seconds, that's when I'm looking up pronunciations. There are a couple of different apps that I use on the phone. One is an application called How'd You Say? And for example, you type it in and then you press it and it says, I can't do it right now because I'm recording onto the lav mic and it won't put it out the speaker if the lav mic's plugged in, but it reads it out to you. There's another one called Forvo, does a very similar thing. Then there's Google Translate, which is basically if the first two apps, which have real people reading them, fail, you can go to Google Translate, you know, for Chinese or Japanese or something if there's really not the word out there, and then you can get the Japanese or Chinese or whatever robot voice to read it back to you, and then I can give you a better pronunciation than I could do on just, you know, randomly guessing. So that's kind of where I get pronunciations from. Obviously, this doesn't work perfectly all the time because I've made some pretty notable pronunciation mistakes. One of the most interesting things is, and if you do this or if you do kind of any sort of work where you need to pronounce things professionally, it always amazes me, like I wasn't sure, is it lava, lavo? What's the pronunciation of that? fairly sure it was larvae, but I needed to check, so I look it up and then it reads it to me just to make sure. But there are ones where you're like, I definitely know that, I definitely know how that's pronounced, and then it turns out you're wrong, and then that can be embarrassing. It is what it is. My favorite one was I once did a video where I pronounced the Nobel Prize as the Nobel Prize for people who are being noble. Not that, it's the Nobel Prize, named after Alfred Nobel. Yes, that was embarrassing. I kind of regret repeating it here in this video. Oh yes, also forgot to mention, rough time for the actual recording thing. This video, typically a little bit longer than average, took about 30 minutes for recording, maybe 15 minutes for setup and wind down, so 45 minutes. I would say 30 to 45 minutes on average. Okay, so now we move on to the editing process. As you probably saw when I ran through that video very quickly, there were a lot of scripts. You see a lot of me doing this, coming close to the camera, and this is when I have to scroll back the teleprompter. Do you remember that Bluetooth pedal that I showed you? That can only make it stop and start. I don't know why they couldn't program it to allow me to kind of wind back, but I have to go to the teleprompter and adjust it every time I screw something up. So that video is about 30 minutes of recording. We're gonna edit that down. I guess it's gonna be about 10 to 12 minutes long once the edit's done. That's a really rough guess. But we'll see, there are a lot of mistakes, even though, I've proofed it and everything. There's still a lot of scrubs, and there's still a lot of things I do multiple times in order to make sure that I get it just right, and, sometimes I even don't after that, so that's how mistakes slip through. Now, normally this is actually something that is done by our video editor, Al. He takes the files, as I showed you, I upload them to Dropbox, and he basically grabs them, loads them into Adobe Premiere, which is a video editing program, and then cuts out all of those mistakes and sends it back to me. There are a couple of reasons why I want to actually show you this process and do it myself. One is because I did it myself for a long time, so I know how it works and the kind of process. Two, I want to show you how long it takes to do an edit. I guess there's a third reason, and that's because this video that I'm making is kind of in a rush, and I need to get this this edited video to our producer, Alex, as quickly as possible, today if possible, and I don't know if Al will be able to turn it around in time. So let's just crack on with the edit. I'm gonna move over to the computer. Okay, so what I do is I just drag my, I'm actually working with two screens here, so actually over on the other screen, which I'm not recording, I'm importing the files. Great, so we've got 29 minutes and 52 seconds of video, and you can see in here in the timeline, let's just make that bigger, there are a whole bunch of mistakes. So this is where the edit happens. I'm going to start that not very good timer program over here. Let's reset that and start that again. And let's get cracking. I'm gonna speed up the video and then drag this over when I'm done, so you don't have to watch this whole thing. It does take a while. Okay, so that is our edit done. Basically, each of these points is an edit, so it takes quite a while to go through. Let me show you the time on that. So that was 35 minutes, basically. Let me just stop that. Maybe add 10 minutes in for admin time, so I guess this editing bit takes about 45 minutes for a pretty normal video. That is 10 minutes and 56 seconds long. I think, what did I guess, 10 to 12 minutes? I'm not sure, but that's about right. Okay, then normally what happens is Al has finished editing that video, and then basically when you're editing a file in Premiere, you're not actually creating a new file. We don't get him to export it. All of those little cut points are actually remembered in one file, so he just sends that to me, which is maybe a 20 kilobyte file, so there's not a lot of sending files back and forth, which is enormously convenient because that would add a whole bunch of time to doing this. This is actually how we used to do it till I got smart and realized that this is way too technical, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he would send that back to me, I would watch it and make sure that the edit is good. If there's anything missed, I'll fix it, or if I don't like how a cut looks, then I'll just make little tweaks here and there. Maybe 10-minute video, maybe only takes 15 minutes. It's actually a pretty quick process, so I would add 15 extra minutes to that, bringing the total time for this editing section to 1 hour. So now comes another major step in the process of creating this video in general, and that's the actual production process. This is specifically the bit where we take the edited footage that we've just got and turn it into something resembling a finished video. So that would be, removing the green screen, adding the images, adding the text, all of that sort of stuff. Now, what I've done so far while making this explanation video is kind of take you through the steps one thing at a time, but for the sake of brevity, this is a long process, and screencasting this for 3 hours and doing it myself itself is just not really practical. I want to get this video done so we can get it out before the 1 million subscribers is actually hit. So what I've done for this is Alex has already made the video. I'm going to go over to the computer and kind of break, Alex is our producer, by the way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down and kind of show you all of the different elements that make up a video and then give you a time estimation, based on that rather than screencasting the whole thing because, well, that would take forever. So let's go over to the computer. Let me bring up the file that Alex has created and I'll walk you through all of the different steps. Okay, so as I already mentioned, the way we manage things is largely through Dropbox and Google Drive. All of our files are shared through Dropbox. So you can see here, these are all of the files that actually make up the final project. So you can see we grab our stock images from Big Stock. There are a lot of those right there. There are original MP4 files, and here are the relevant Premiere files, and there's an After Effects project which does the text effects and some of the transitions, I believe. So what I do is I will then open up the master project file, which is this one. So normally what I'm doing at this point is I'm just loading up this video to watch it for errors. I'm going to talk about fixing errors in the next section, but let me just break down what exactly has gone on here. So the first thing that really happens is the green screen. So obviously the original videos look something like, if I just get rid of those Ultra keys, it looks something like this. Obviously I've been shifted over to the right and you can see the green screen there. So a chroma key is introduced and that eliminates the backgrounds. Then you can see we've added in the standard backgrounds here. As I mentioned earlier, we have different colors for different topics. So here you can see the blue is related to science. Then also this track down here, that's the music track. I think we have about 10 different tracks which we created using a service called Duke Deck. And yeah, so that's introduced. Then there is this intro that I had made a long time ago, and that's just what we call a stinger at the front. Over here we have the lower third, which is Today I Found Out, and then my Twitter handles. Then we have, so that rolls, and then this adjustment layer up here makes it black and white. This is the title, which if we double click, you can see that every time just a new title is dropped into there. And then, as I mentioned, the backgrounds, and then these. This adjustment layer basically makes some corrections on how we want it to look, maybe adjusting the colors a little, maybe I like this automatic SL Clean Codec B, which let me see if you can see the difference with that introduced. It's just a filter that we like to apply. You can see that it just adds this rather nice vignette around the outside, and maybe just, you see how I've just become a little bit more, I don't know if that's high contrast or whatever, it's just a look that I rather like. Okay, and then as we go through the videos, you see various things are introduced. So here we have this text effect, and that's something that is made in After Effects. I'm not going to load up After Effects now, but that's something that's created in After Effects, and then it is brought in into this project. So those are created separately. Again, you can see here another After Effects. See, that image kind of slides in like that. And then we also introduce images in another way. So you can see here, this pops up, and that is actually introduced in Premiere itself because there's no sort of advanced effects. And this kind of transparent effect is, it's either, yeah, this is just a default thing of the image, and I think I love the transparent look on the blue background. I think it looks super neat, but maybe that's just me. People seem to like it. I like it. Okay, and so here you can see we've got a lot of images using along. I'm actually going to talk in a minute about the kind of situation with stock and public domain images. It's one of the most common questions we get, something that comes up. I'll talk about it in a second. Let me just finish talking about the video production itself. So all of these, so you can see, here was the original edited thing, and then all of these extra things are added around it. Let me just zoom out so you kind of get a global view of what we've got going on here. So you can see all of these images are added. There's our background, there's our vocal audio, there's our musical audio, there's the adjustment layer over the top. And if we zoom in on something like this, and over here, this is again another title we have in the bonus facts. So you can see there, this is just another title that says bonus facts. So I hope you understand why I didn't kind of go through this process in, over the long term, because it is just a matter of selecting a lot of different images, which Alex is responsible for, highlighting important texts, images here. Basically, when that's been created, I normally don't jump in at this stage and take a look. That would actually happen in the proofing section, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So that is the process that Alex goes through to produce a video. The length it really takes to create totally depends on a few factors, and one of those would be the length of the video. Obviously, if something's 20 minutes or 5 minutes, there's going to be a lot of difference in the production time. This one's a fairly average 10 minutes long. Also, the kind of complexity of the video also matters. This one was a lot of stock images because it's a subject that isn't, if you've got something about history and there's lots of historical images you need to find and introduce and find ones that are in the public domain, that's going to take a lot longer. But I think the kind of average time to create a video would be about 3 hours. So now, just before we get into kind of the proofing section of things, I do want to briefly talk about what images we can and what images we can't use. I mean, this is actually a really common question that YouTubers have. There's a lot of legal uncertainty around this. There's this policy known as fair use, which is like, you can use an image, even if it's copyright, sort of, if you're using it to create something new. This is actually way more complicated. I'll actually link to a link in the description below, which sort of defines fair use a lot better than I am. But it's a really complicated thing, and YouTube can be a pretty scary place if you are doing this for a living, because if you get 3 copyright strikes for using things that you're not supposed to use, then they can delete your channel and then you are left with nothing, which really, really sucks. So we've got to be super careful. Now, a lot of YouTube channels kind of play it fast and loose. Like, take an example. Let's say we're doing a video about Elon Musk, and we want to show a picture of Elon Musk meeting, I don't know, the president or something. And it's like, we're talking about this. We're talking about, say, blah, 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 and so Elon Musk met President Barack Obama. We're just showing a picture, or we've got a text thing. And that's because we can't find an image that is affordable. I mean, you can probably buy these and they cost hundreds of dollars, press photos, and we just can't afford that. And it's like, why aren't you showing a picture of this meeting? It's all over the internet. And the reason is because those are copyrighted images, and if we use those and YouTube or someone reports that or says, hey, that's my copyright, we get a strike. And as I said, if we get 3 of those, then our channel goes away. And when you're using so many images like we do, that's a really big problem, and that's a really big risk. So we entirely use images that are from the public domain, that are Creative Commons, or are stock photos that we've published, that we've purchased. This means that sometimes we don't get to use those exact images, which is not, it's not the ideal situation. A lot of YouTube channels kind of play it a bit fast and loose with these rules. We are just a bit more risk averse than them, and we hope that the quality of our content, the presentation, and the images that we do find are enough. Now, we're not saying that this is where we want to be forever. Another thing people often bring up is, hey, Simon, why don't you use animations? And the simple reason there is they are enormously expensive. We do want to get into animations and start doing them more. Just to give you an idea of how much this stuff costs, when we were starting out, we were like, I wonder how much it costs to do something, that these really fancy animation channels do. And the price we were given was $10,000 per minute. So if we're doing a 10-minute video, that's $100,000. Not something we can afford, unfortunately. Also, as we do this every day, I mean, these animation channels, you'll find very few that are really high quality and doing videos every day, simply because it's just not affordable. $100,000 every day, it's $3 million a month. We don't have that kind of money. But what we are hoping to do is kind of implement some sort of hybrid model. So as people know, we do have a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting us, this isn't a plug video, but if you are interested in supporting us, patreon.com/today I found out, we are hoping to use those Patreon funds once we reach one of our goals, which is $3,000 a month, to bring someone onto our team who can supplement the work that Alex is doing in order to add animations over the top. So when there's something that isn't really perfect for a stock image or for just showing text, or something that really suits a quick animation well, we want to introduce that sort of thing, because then that's something we've created, we have complete rights to it, and we think it can look really good. It's super expensive, something down the line. We're always thinking, we're always growing, we're always wanting to try new things. So that's definitely something that's going to be coming up. So that was a brief aside on images. I just felt it was a really important topic to address because we get so many questions about it. Anyway, let's move on to the next thing. Okay, let's talk about advertising. Now, you will sometimes see in our videos sponsor spots. These are from companies like Blue Apron or the Great Courses Plus, or... Now this section is a little bit different. It's kind of more like an aside to the actual production process because the video, Why Do Trees Poop, doesn't actually have an advert in it, like most of our videos don't. But I wanted to talk about the advert process anyway because I feel it's important to me. I feel like adverts as a YouTube creator are essentially what allow me to be a YouTube creator. So talking about this stuff is important, illustrating like how ads are made and how that kind of process works. I feel it's pretty important, so I'm including it here. Now, the way these things look when they're finally presented to you guys is that they look like they were originally recorded as part of the original video, which is exactly what I want because I want it to be like a frictionless experience. You're going from, watching our entertainment to watching a sponsor spot, and that is entirely intentional. But the reality is we're running a daily channel, so I have to get the videos prepped ahead of time, and then when a sponsor chooses a day they want it to go out, I plug that spot in later, I match up my shirt, I go in and I do it, and then I stitch it all together in Adobe Premiere later. Content of the ad is something I really wanted to speak to because what I really appreciate about you guys, most commenters are super positive about us getting ads, and not just like, I'm glad you guys are getting paid, but are also enjoy the way I do ads. And I'm glad that is the case because I spend a lot of time thinking about what I want to put into the ads, how I want to present it, how I want to present the company. Because, they send us a sheet with talking points. And it's like, you got to mention this, you got to mention this, you got to mention this. And then there's like a bunch of things that you can potentially talk about. I tend to ignore those ones that I can potentially talk about because, I don't know, a lot of these companies, they advertise on a lot of channels. I want to deliver something different. It's better for you guys. It's better for the sponsor, I believe, because it makes it's more authentic. Like let's take Audible as an example. I can talk about all the different features of Audible, or I can talk about a book that I really like. Like I just finished Arnold Schwarzenegger's biography, Schwarzenegger's biography, it's like a 26-hour beast of a book. It's utterly amazing and inspiring, and I'm actually excited about the next Audible spot because I'm not going to talk about, I'll mention free trials and all that stuff, but I want to talk about how great that experience was. And honestly, this is what I like about being a YouTuber because you kind of get this creative freedom. You get a lot of go to what you think is best is thrown my direction, which is really creatively freeing, and I think it allows me to do ads in a way that is actually pleasant to watch. So this actually takes a long time. There's the time spent thinking about what I want to talk about. It's a Skillshare or the Great Courses Plus or a company like this. It's going through that course, going and learning about that subject or learning about that skill and then coming back and talking about why it's good. It's not something that's immediately tangible in terms of time. I mean, the production I reckon is maybe 1 hour, but then, there's the time spent around. There's a time really spent getting to know these companies, and this isn't some like BS that I'm spinning you this way. That's because I want to present it in the best way possible. I want it to be fun and interesting and not just an advert. Look, I can't really put an exact figure on it, but I'm just going to go with the absolute minimum and say that it's about 1 hour per ad spot, but it's likely higher than that. I just can't quantify it easily. So 1 hour for every video that has an ad. Okay, so now we come to the part of the production process where I have that video that you just saw me show you how it was made, and then that comes to me, and then what I do is I open it, I watch it, and I look for any problems that are in the video. These are typically images that I don't like, that I would maybe change, typos in the text that appears on the screen, something wrong with the actual video itself, like the camera drifting out of focus. I use autofocus on the camera, so if I move away from the center, it can sometimes focus on the green screen, and then I need to fix that. I'm going to show you how all of that works on the computer because that's just an easier way to do it. So let's jump over to there. So typically I'll have fixed a few things in here by this point when I went through the original footage that was recorded before it went to Alex for production, but some things slip through, some things I just prefer to fix afterwards, like one of those things I mentioned, drifting focus, often because, for example, I don't think there are any in here because just in the last section I watched this, but well, let me show you what happens. So basically, I just play the video through in here and just look for errors, look for things I don't like. What I'll do is, rather than actually go through it and speed this up, you can see it's about 11 minutes. So it typically takes about 15 minutes to watch just because I'll pause it, maybe I'll tweak a tiny little thing, but let's say about 15 minutes to watch a 10-minute video. And then what, for example, I don't think there are actually any big errors in here. So what I might do is just pretend that there are some, just to give you an example of what would happen. So let's say if I was drifting out of focus here, so say I wasn't in focus, what I then do is, rather than record it, a neat little trick is to simply drag this up here, put it over the top, just increase the size of that, and then basically make it a kind of full-size image, and then do like a pan over it like this. So instead of having to go and do, get in front of the camera and add like 20 minutes, I can simply drag a photo on top over myself, and that fixes a problem. Also, any vocal flubs, sometimes that means I will have to go, if I say something wrong, then I have to get in front of the camera and then basically go over and repeat the whole process. Set up the gear, bring it all in, do the fix, drop it in. That maybe takes like 15 to 20 minutes. So I really, really try to avoid those when possible, but they happen, unfortunately. I am a human, not a machine. So as I mentioned, we also have other errors. So maybe if in here, sometimes an apostrophe might be missing or something, I'll just go in, open up After Effects and make a little tweak to that. So, nothing major, just these little things to make sure it's right. And hey, things still slip through. I'll be the first to admit it. There are occasionally mistakes, but we do try our best. And then sometimes images that I just don't like. I'm not sure what this is for here, but what I would do is I would either just delete it and then move myself to the center. That's probably the easiest way. Another option would be to, let me just take that back because that image is probably good. Another thing I could do is find a different image and just easily grab it and replace it, pop it in there. Not a big deal. Anyway, so then after fixing it and proofing it, then comes the export. But this whole process, maybe 15 minutes to watch, then let's say maybe I do need to make a fix, that's another 20 minutes. I would guess per video, if there's no fixes, it's less. If there are fixes, it's too much. So I would say on average, between half an hour to an hour. So I would say, let's just say 30 minutes to proof each video. This is also a particularly long one, so let's just stick with 30 minutes. All right, and then we come to what is perhaps the most hands-off part of this whole process, and that is taking this file that is currently in Premiere and exporting it, turning it into an MP4 high-definition file, which we can upload to YouTube. Now, let's go over to the computer, and I will show you this relatively simple part of the process. So over on the computer, we got the project all loaded up here, all proofed, all ready to go. Then all I have to do is hit Command M. This window, let me just put that in here. Opens. Mostly I've got everything set up with Simon high definition to YouTube, so that's all these settings preset, ready to go. I'm just going to take off maximum render quality because it doesn't really make a big difference, and I want this to go fast so I can continue showing you guys how this works. So it's estimated file size of 1.3 gigabytes, thereabouts. So I just hit Q, it prepares the export, then it loads up this program. I'll just bring that onto the screen, which is called Adobe Media Encoder. I'm going to talk about the painful process of working with this in just a moment. We just wait, and we wait, and we wait, and we wait, and eventually, hey! Okay, and then I usually leave this to the end of the day, but I'm going to do it all now for you guys. You hit play, and it'll chew through that. It'll give me an elapsed time over here, so 3 seconds, and then a remaining time of... it says 2 hours now, but it's really going to be like 1 hour and a bit. So I'm just going to leave this to run. I'm not going to bother recording it, because then I'll be left with an enormous file. I can just tell you guys there's a little text file that it spits out afterwards that looks something like this, which will tell me how long. You can see these last ones took 45 minutes, and then an hour and 12, 55 minutes, so usually about an hour. Just as an aside here, I do want to mention that one of the things that frustrates me most about this whole thing is the bugginess of some of these programs. Like working, the Adobe Creative Suite is a wonderful piece of software, and I'm very grateful that it allows me to do what I do. Adobe Premiere is a very powerful program, but the number of times I come in after like a night's running of the export queue, and it's like, oh, there were errors, or your computer shut down for no reason, or the program crashed and you just have to start again, is really, really frustrating. And this could be perhaps a good time to point out the amount of time that is added to this process, the whole production process, not just about the Premiere, not just about the Q program crashing, but like Premiere crashing or Premiere having problems. The other day, I was working on there, and for some reason it was incredibly slow. It took me about 45 minutes to realize that for some reason Premiere just was not using my graphics card. It was putting all of the work on the CPU, which means that it is so slow. and it just barely works at all, and nothing was rendering correctly. Turns out my Photoshop had been working incredibly slowly a few days previously. I read a tutorial on the internet which said, turn off graphic card assistance in Photoshop and it will speed it up, which totally worked. I didn't realize it would globally turn off the graphics card across all Adobe Creative Suite programs, and so also it turned it off in the Adobe Premiere Pro, which sucked, and then I turned it back on and everything was fine. This sort of error, surprisingly common. It is what it is, it's part of the working, but it does add this kind of random intangible time, which we're not really counting here, to this whole process, like 45 minutes of just painfully slow work, which could have been done in 5 minutes if it was working properly. These kind of things. Kind of annoying. Okay, so I don't really think it's fair to count the export time in this, because that's just, you know, I hit it to run when my computer is just left overnight, and it'll just chew through that, you know, like a stack of videos. I'll put loads, you know, I'll proof a bunch, put them in the queue and set them to go overnight. I would say, you know, that it takes about an hour for each one to export, but I would say my actual time spent, maybe 10 minutes. So another thing that needs to be mentioned, it doesn't really fit into any specific place during the production process, and that is the thumbnails that we make for the videos. I showed you it right at the beginning of my section of this video, the production sheet that we work through when making these videos, and thumbnails are an important part of that. Anyone who's starting on YouTube, any advice if anyone asks me, I usually, you know, some of the first advice I say is make sure you have good thumbnails, make sure you have good titles, and that is something, you know, we're always working on, we're always trying to improve. Thumbnails are actually done by someone else, actually my girlfriend, who's a graphic designer, does all of the thumbnails for the channel, so she makes things like this and like this. Basically, I was talking to her about it, and the time spent on each of these, usually about 15-20 minutes each. And very simply, those files are then uploaded to the Dropbox that we share, and then when it comes to the upload process, which I'm going to get to a little bit later on, then those thumbnails are taken from that Dropbox and put onto the YouTube video so that everything looks nice and ready to go. So that is very simply the process for creating thumbnails. Software-wise, Photoshop, image-wise, all public domain or stock photos, stuff like that. So that is thumbnails, 15 minutes. Okay, so now we're going to address the uploading process. Now you might just think that this is a simple matter of clicking that upload button on YouTube and off you go to the races, everything is done from there. But actually there's a lot of moving parts that I've alluded to previously, thumbnails, titles, and a whole bunch of other stuff that is going to be best addressed over at the computer. So let me go and show you what the uploading process for each video involves. It's surprisingly complicated. So the first part of this process, we just hit that upload button over there. Now what I do is definitely set that to private, don't want to screw anything up, then just drag that video file over to here and then I'll upload. I always double check this to make sure it's set to private after that screw up. Fortunately I have a very fast fiber connection, so this actually works out pretty damn quickly. Check in the title, usually you need a few corrections here. Often, you know, question marks can't be used in some programs or something, so often there's not a question mark there or it gets lost at some point, so we do trees, poop, and pee. Okay, great. Then down here we have the description, which requires quite a lot of customization. As you can see, I already have the information in here. These are actually something I have to do later, the end slate videos. In fact, nowadays we just have one linked to here. This default uploads are a little out of date. Then I do the intro text, which I usually grab from the article. Normally the first few lines of the article, of the script, work perfectly as an introduction. And then also, because we have a website as well, I link over to the script there. Then we also have sources. Sources are important. These are basically the references from the article. So actually I grabbed these from the website. Here's the website, and then all the sources are down here. So got to copy all those across. Okay, so that's the sources copied across. I think references are incredibly important in YouTube videos because there's a lot of false information out there, and by putting those in, it really adds a lot of, you know, authority to the video. Okay, next we have to do the image sources, image credit basically, just letting people know where we got our images from. What we actually do for this is we have a separate folder because these tend to be really lengthy. You know, we're copying across all Creative Commons, public domain, and stock images to give due credit. Unfortunately, there's a character limit over here, so we just copy a link across to that Google Doc that we created. And then at the bottom, credit to Duke Deck, where we created the music, so everyone. So now I just got to do this from the description, but we'll be doing that later. Tags are important. They help us get found in search as well as in related videos, so those are important to do. We have some kind of default ones there, which we find are good for every video. So now what we just do is I kind of add some that are relevant to the article, so kind of from memory as well as bringing up the article over here. I've got two screens here, so on the other side I've got the article open just for ease, and then I come up with some tags, and I've got 500 characters, so I usually include the title, and then, you know, what might people be searching for? How do trees get rid of waste? Tree poop could be another good one. Now, no one ever sees these unless you've got a special tool that will extract the tags, so then you can go look at all the tags for our videos if you so want. And that's a good number of tags. You can fill it all the way up to 500 if you want. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Just for brevity, let's not go all out today. Just as a side here, this is another place where we have someone helping us out. My assistant handles most of the upload procedure. So actually I upload the videos because all the files are local to me. I dump them onto YouTube in private, as you saw, and then he'll kind of go through the rest of the process, putting all of the little bits and pieces that you're seeing into the video. And then the thumbnail, that actually comes from, you just click here and I grab the Okay, so it turns out I haven't actually got the thumbnail for that done yet. I'm kind of rushing this video through, so that hasn't actually been created, but basically you just drop it onto there and it'll be good to go. You can just imagine that bit, use your imagination. Then what we do is we go to monetization, just make sure that monetization is turned on. I mean, we got to make some money. Yes, and now we actually have to wait for it to be processed before I can do the cards and callouts and things like that need to be included. So let's just sit tight while that video is processed and then we'll come back to it. All right, and through the magic of television, YouTube, we are back. Now what I want to do is add some end screen and annotations. So basically this is where we introduce at the end, you know, you'll often find there's a Patreon logo, there's a link over to a couple of other videos. Those are put in here. Just because this is behaving really slowly, I'm actually not going to do this right now. Well, it is loading now, but this was not really working properly. But essentially what you can just do is you add in, what I do is usually a best for viewer, and then pop that over on the right, and then another one down here, and then a subscribe over on the left, as well as a link to the Patreon. And then all of that scrolls through very nicely at the end, and then you just save that and it's good to go. I'm just going to discard that for now because I want to get this absolutely right, and the system is being a little bit screwy right now. Then what we do is we also do subtitles and closed captions. Now, I'm not sure how important these are. I think people really do like having them. What we do is we actually add them, so add English. And because we've got a script, it's really similar to the final version, so we just add the script in here, and then you save it, and YouTube actually processes all of that for you. It's actually really, really very easy. Okay, and then basically once that's done, again, I'm just going to leave this for now because I'm not trusting it right now, but you get the idea of what goes on. And then down here, we add it to relevant playlists. So all videos is always one we do, and then this would definitely be a science one. So we add it to the playlists. Right now it's private. Another problem we had was the videos were unlisted before. We were adding them to playlists and people could find them in those, even though they weren't supposed to be released yet. Then what I do is we use a project management tool called Asana, and that has when the videos are actually going to be published. So the guide there will tell me, okay, so I got to publish this on the, let's say the 28th. And then we always do the videos at about 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock. And that's local time for me, which is GMT +2. And then I add a message here which says like, hey everyone, today's video is about this. I add in basically the intro text from over here. And by the way, what I was talking about earlier is the video that we link over to. That is one of the videos that we insert as an end screen. So that goes there so people can click on it. And then all you do is you click publish on Friday the 28th of July or whenever we will publish this. I'm just actually going to cancel that for now, but that is the general idea of how things actually go out. So, and that is pretty much it. There are opportunities for mistakes. Sometimes we screw up. There was one time that I uploaded a bunch of videos and forgot to put them as private and put them all as public. So suddenly, like, I think I did 5 videos at once. They were all released to the world. Maybe some of you remember these times. And then very quickly I had to take them all down and mark them as private and then schedule them out because, and also YouTube doesn't like it when you do that. And then when those videos are released again, they don't usually do so well off the bat. So that was a pretty major mistake. Mistakes are made, as I mentioned a few times. I am, alas, just a human. And well, that pretty much wraps up the upload process. I would estimate that the actual time spent for each one, and as I mentioned, there's a bunch of management stuff that goes on around this. Uploading is a particular part of that. I would say that it takes roughly, for each video, between 30 and 35 minutes.
Contrary to many a commenter's remark, you'll note we've mentioned nothing about considering length of content, and certainly not padding anything to get over the supposedly beneficial 10-minute mark on YouTube. In fact, if you've watched this far, you'll have noticed length of content is never a consideration anywhere in the process of creating even the article version in the first place. It should simply be as long as it needs to be to get all the interesting bits in and no longer. Padding content would be an incredible waste of resources and be guaranteed to bore people. The detail level and occasional tangents in our content will, of course, also occasionally bore some people too, but at least in that case it will also potentially interest many people, particularly fans of our style of content. Padding content interests nobody and just costs a lot of extra money, both in the original article creation and even more in video production time, costing more and more each extra paragraph or minute added. So for example, a 10-minute video is going to take much more than twice as long to produce than a 5-minute video. And a similar thing is true for the article production side, with a 2,000-word article taking significantly more than double the time to produce versus a 1,000-word article and on down. It's not a linear growth. So it'd be quicker and cheaper to create 2 5-minute videos versus 1 10-minute one. That's not to mention more profitable, as 2 5-minute videos would probably get about double the views of the 10-minute video. And while it's possible to then enable an extra ad in that longer video, not everyone's going to make it that deep into the video to see it, diminishing returns versus the 2 videos. And to my knowledge, we've never actually enabled that extra ad anyway, though YouTube sometimes, for whatever reason, still shows it. I could definitely see how a certain type of vlogger with a certain type of content, maybe ad-libbing talking in front of a camera, might be incentivized to push their content over the 10-minute mark, as the cost to do so for certain YouTubers is basically nothing, especially if they can keep things interesting in their format off the cuff. But for us, every extra bit added just makes the whole thing take significantly longer to produce, not just being a negative in loss of productivity time, but also costing a lot more than that extra ad might earn us, let alone potential loss of bored subscribers. But either way, a given article and video just ends up being as long as we think it needs to be to include a lot of interesting tidbits. Sometimes that means a quick video of just a couple minutes, and sometimes that means a half-hour video, and everything in between.
Well, that is it. This video turned out longer than I thought. That is how we make our videos, and then we repeat that every single day of the week, 365 days a year. Anyway, if you would like to support us in keeping doing this, please do consider becoming a patron. Just go to patreon.com/today I found out. It helps us keep these videos coming and allow me to do things, and allowing us to do things like this, make creative videos, just all of this good stuff. I know this video is long. If you watched all the way through, I really appreciate it, and I appreciate having all of you guys as subscribers. It's amazing to hit 1 million. Oh, by the way, I should add, if you want another video like this, another one I thought we could do is a Q&A. If you've got questions for us, if you feel like we didn't answer something in what felt like this enormously comprehensive video, hit us up in the comments below. Maybe we'll do a Q&A video or something along that nature in the future. Thanks for watching.